with reference to relevant authorities, discuss the application of the doctrine of judicial precedent in Malaysia. Consider also the circumstances when a court may depart from a previous decision. Judicial precedent is defined as a judgment or decision of a court cited as an authority for legal principle in making decision. It is also known as stare decisis from Latin word stare decisis et non queta mover, which means stand by decision and do not disturb what is settled. The case that defines the meaning of judicial precedent is the case of Kerajaan Malaysia and others, and Teh Che Huat, which federal court defines precedent as a judicial decision which serves as a rule for future determination in similar cases. Judicial precedent is a legal case that establishes a principle of a rule that court or other judicial body can use when deciding other case with the similar issue or facts. An application of judicial precedent that must be applied or followed is known as binding precedent. Moreover, judicial precedent is not only persuasive authority but also must be followed if a similar issue arises. If the higher court decides a principle, then the principle must be followed in other later cases. Specifically, other courts are bound to superior court's decision to make new law.
Next, the doctrine of judicial decisions uses the application of stare decisis, which means to stand by the decision. Basically, the lower court is bound to the higher court's earlier decision. It is to make sure the consistency of the law. There are two ways on how the doctrine of judicial precedent works, which are vertical and horizontal. Judicial precedent in vertical way can be described as the court is bound to the higher court's previous decision. For example, magistrate court is bound to follow the decision of the higher court from magistrate court. The case that showed the operation of vertical way of judicial precedent is the case of Jason, Chan Huan Sen and others, NPP. In this case, the court held that doctrine of stare decisis is very important as the Court of Appeal is bound to follow a decision of the federal court and its own previous decision. Next, the second way is in horizontal way. Horizontal way can be illustrated as the court is bound to follow its own previous decisions. The case that have been discussed about horizontal way of doctrine of judicial precedent is the case of Dato Tan Heng Chew and Tan Kim Hor, which the federal court held that judicial hierarchy must be observed in the interest of finality and certainty of the law and for the orderly development of legal rules, as well as for the courts and lawyers to regulate their efforts. If the judicial precedent fails to be observed, it might create chaos and misapprehensions in the judicial system.
There are three situations where the doctrine of judicial precedent is not applicable. This means that the court does not look at the judicial precedent in deciding a case. For the first situation, it's when its own previous decision conflicts. The Court of Appeal must decide which to follow and which to reject, irrespective of whether either of the conflicting decision is an earlier case or a later. For the second situation, the Court of Appeal must refuse to follow a decision its own which cannot stand with a decision of the federal court, even though its decision has not expressly overruled by the federal court. And for the last situation, is when the Court of Appeal need not to follow a decision of its own because it need to satisfy that it was given per incurium.
These exceptions were laid down in the case of Young and Bristol Company Limited. In criminal matter, however, because a person's liberty may be at stake, the Court of Appeal, apart from the situation above, may also depart from its own previous decision if it is satisfied that the law has been misapplied or misunderstood in the previous decision. In conclusion, once the precedent is made, it remains binding until it is overruled by a high court in a later case. If a similar dispute has been resolved in the past, the court is bound to follow the reasoning used in a prior decision. It can be noted that the importance of this doctrine is to preserve the position of common law in our legal system as long as it is relevant. It is able to ensure the consistency of our judicial system.